ghouls and gals, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor and today's video is going to be a beginner's guide to reading Stephen King. This video is coming out September 21st, which is Stephen King's birthday, so I figured in honor of this occasion and then also just in honor of spooky season, I would sit down and tell y'all 5 entry points to get into Stephen King's work, because I know that it can be very intimidating. This man puts out one, even more than one, sometimes books a year, so he's got like 50 plus books on his back catalog. If you're wanting to get into Stephen King, that can be very intimidating, and so many people have so many different favorite Stephen Kings or different places that they suggest that you start, so I thought I would give some recommendations. So here are 5 places where you could start reading Stephen King, and I think that they are great entry points into the Stephen King universe. And I did say universe as opposed to backlogs because this man has quite his own world created. So for this first book recommendation, we are going with a classic and probably the most obvious starting point, and that is going to be Carrie. I am recommending this book for a number of reasons. Number one, it's really short. Look at how short that is. Stephen King is known to be very wordy. He has several books that are more than 1,000 pages, so that can be super intimidating. This one's pretty short. It's almost like novella length, and because this one is so short, it makes it very readable, but also because this is his first book, I would overall recommend y'all starting Stephen King in publication order. The reason for why I'm saying this is because he references a lot of his books in his other books. So if you start from his very first book and then go on, you will be able to capture all of the Easter eggs and understand them as they pop up. Now, by no means are these essential for understanding later books, but it is really cool. For like an example, Dreamcatcher, you get a reference to it where it does not impact the story at all, but if you have read it, then you'll enjoy it a little bit more. I believe that there are 3 different timelines or worlds that Stephen King operates in. So in some of his books, he talks about the events in the other books that they're books or they're movie adaptations, or sometimes he mentions the events that have happened in other books as if they were real events that happened in a different town. So just starting in chronological order will have you understanding all of those Easter eggs and really make you appreciate the vast world and character building that this man is able to create. And other than that, Carrie's really enjoyable. It's really short, really fast paced, and I feel like this is a really accessible starting point for reading Stephen King. The next recommendation is also going to be a shorter one. It's technically a short story. It's in a short story collection bind up, but it is, I think it's like 11 hours, the audiobook is on its own, and that would be The Long Walk. This is Richard Bachman, but that is Stephen King's pen name. But this one is a really great place to start as well, because first of all, this gets a lot of hype, and I think the story well deserved. It's also getting a movie adaptation soon, at least when I'm filming this, so that's really exciting. If you're someone who loves to read the book before watching the movie, then this could be a great place to start. This one is also like very fast paced. We are following just one horrific event that is happening. This one is a competition. A bunch of young boys are signed up for a very long walk, and they start walking, and if they stop walking, they're out of the competition, but that just doesn't mean out of the competition. So this, you know, if you like Hunger Games, or if you like dystopian that have to deal with a game aspect that seems super fun and then dives into something really dark, this would be a great book recommendation for you. And it's just intensely readable because you have one event that you're following and one very high stakes event. You're going to want to keep reading this one. At no point does it lull or you get bored with the story. The audiobook's really cool. I was a little bit of a masochist and I read this one while walking on the treadmill. So if you like immersive reading, go on a walk while you're reading this book. That's gonna be one way to really elevate the fear factor for you on this one. But this is just a really well told story, and from start to finish, there's action, there's intrigue, really get to know these boys as they're participating in this long walk, and that makes the stakes feel even higher. And the audiobook for this one is really excellent as well. Bonus points if you are walking while you're reading it. This next recommendation is for someone who maybe wants a one and done Stephen King experience. Maybe you're not interested in reading all of his books, but maybe you want to add one to your October TBR, or just read one to say that you've read a book from the King of Horror. So that is going to be Pet Sematary. I think this is Stephen King's best book. It's not my personal favorite, it is up there, but I just think that this book, it's the best. This is the most impactful grief horror that I have ever read, and I am so glad that I did read this book before becoming a parent. So just be warned, parents of small children especially, this one could be super hard for you. We're following a family that when tragedy strikes, they learn that the pet cemetery that is close by to their house has resurrecting powers, and the family learns that sometimes dead is better. This one is just, it's horrifying, but it's also just so heartbreaking. This one is another one where the audiobook is excellent. It's narrated by Michael C. Hall of Dexter fame, and audiobook is great. Physical reading experience is great. I know that I am not the only one who believes that this is Stephen King's best book, and it truly is one of the most horrific and sad at the same time books that I've ever read. It explores grief in such a stunning and horrific and heart-wrenching way. Again, if you are someone who just wants to read one book and then be done with it, I think this is Stephen King's best. But also, if you're just wanting to use this as a starting point into reading Stephen King, I think this will have you hooked because you have it all. You have the trademark scares that you're going to expect from the king of the horror genre, but you also have impeccable character building and just heart-wrenching moments that are going to keep you hooked, as well as this book is also mentioned in a number of his other books as an Easter egg. So if you are going to be reading all of his books, this is one that I would recommend you prioritize as one of the first because it is brought up so often. So the next book recommendation that I have as a great place to start for Stephen King is actually his most recent release, You Like It Darker. This is a collection of short stories, and why I'm suggesting this is that I think that Stephen King does short stories really well. He's known for his massively huge works like It and The Stand, and while It is one of my favorite books, I have nothing against his longer books. I think he really shines, especially in the horror genre, with his short stories. Now, this is his most recent release. At the time that I am filming this video, this short story collection just came out, so maybe there's a recency bias, but I don't think so. I think this is, as of the time that I'm recording, because I have not read all of Stephen King's short story collections yet, but this is my favorite short story collection. I think it's a great introduction because not only does this collection have like very horrific stories, it also has some other stories like The Answer Man that aren't as horror but more sentimental and character building and unexpectedly just so, for a lack of a better term, beautiful. And I don't think a lot of people realize that when they're trying to get into Stephen King, is that Stephen King is not all about just gruesome horror. He also just is really good at capturing the mundane and just the magic of being a human and being alive. And this short story collection, I think, just captures everything about what makes him such a great writer. You have like some crime stories in here, you have some horror, you have, again, like those little slice of life speculative stories. I think this is a great collection. A caveat, this one does have the sequel to Cujo. It's Rattlesnakes, but I know a lot of people do not want to read Cujo. It has to deal with a dog and a small child, and it's very traumatic. And I know a lot of people, when they hear about Cujo, they decide they never want to read it. That's totally fine. So you still can read and enjoy Rattlesnakes without having read Cujo. I do want to give a caveat if you start with this one that Rattlesnakes will spoil Cujo and Duma Key. So if you have no interest in Cujo, go full speed ahead with this collection. If you haven't read it and you want to, I still think this is a great collection. Maybe read all of it, come back to Rattlesnakes later. But this is really great storytelling, and I think that short stories are definitely a really easy way to get into Stephen King and get hooked on his work. This is kind of a two-in-one recommendation because I know a lot of people are going to hear, oh, there's a Cujo sequel to this one and not want to pick it up, especially for a start starting place. So if you don't want to pick this one up, I would recommend Different Seasons by Stephen King. This is also a short story collection. This is going to be a wildly unpopular opinion, I'm sure. I think You Like It Darker is a better short story collection overall, but this one is a very iconic collection. It has Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption. It has Apt Pupil. It has The Body and The Breathing Method. I believe that The Breathing Method is the only one out of these that has not received a movie adaptation, so this could also be a great recommendation if, you know, maybe you've watched Stand By Me or The Shawshank Redemption and you want to read the book behind those movies. I just included You Like It Darker instead of this one because I feel like a lot of people are going to recommend this as the short story collection to start with, but maybe if it's daunting because you know of how iconic it is, maybe starting with You Like It Darker and then returning to this one later would be a better path for you. The last recommendation is an absolute wild card. I know a lot of people are going to see this and be like, what are you talking about? But hear me out, okay? I would recommend Under the Dome by Stephen King as a good introduction to Stephen King for a number of reasons. I know it's huge. I know that the size of this one is probably so intimidating. That's why I saved it for last. So I would recommend you start your Stephen King journey with this book if, number one, you want like a fun story. And by fun story, I mean like in your own life, when you go back later on and talk to people and be like, oh, well, my first Stephen King book was this. This is an unconventional pick to be sure, but I did pick it because this is actually like hurting my hand. It's very, very large. So I understand it's gonna be intimidating, but I definitely think that this one, that once you dive into it, you don't even realize how large of a book that it is because it is just so endlessly fascinating. This is about a town who one day they wake up, they realize that a huge dome has come over top of their town. They are stuck inside the dome. No one from the outside world can get in and they cannot get out. It's a very intriguing premise, and I picked this one because I think this is a great showcase of what I love most about Stephen King. And what I love most about a Stephen King story is that oftentimes the whole town is a character. You don't just have one protagonist, you follow several people in the town, both good and bad. And not only do you have like your main characters that you spend a lot of time with, but sometimes you just get little one-shots and snippets of just other characters throughout the town. And the way that he builds up a whole entire town that feels real is just incredible storytelling to me. The way that this book, and I just feel like a lot of Stephen King, is that even when he writes a book and I read the synopsis, I'm like, I don't know if that sounds like a book that I would read, or if it's in a subgenre I typically wouldn't read, I'll still pick it up because I love the character work that Stephen King does. And another reason why I recommended this one, this is for people who maybe don't want to read so much about paranormal horror. There are still some speculative elements in this one, but for the most part, this is really going with the tropes and the themes of hell is other people and exploring just how horrific that even though something happens that should bring everyone together, the different factions and pushing people apart, and the ways that people can easily go into like a very Lord of the Flies mindset. The antagonists in this one are just so horrific, and they're horrific because they feel so real. I love It, but I'm never going to run into like an It or Pennywise type character in real life. I could run into people that act like some of the antagonists in this book. So the horror is so real, the characters feel so real. This is such like an epic story, and I think that even if you don't love horror, so maybe you're looking for something just a little more speculative, a little more sci-fi, and not like really gruesome, horrific horror, then I would recommend Under the Dome. I really love this one. In fact, I just saw that Stephen King actually recommended this book as his book in like the Times 21st Century book picks, so it's one that he feels is really great. The social commentary in this one is very timely, and just I really love this book, and I feel like it's definitely an underrated book. I think a large part of that is because of the massive size, but once you dive into it, I promise you are going to be so invested in this story that you won't feel like this is like such a huge story to get through. And I think if you read this, the character work and just the way that Stephen King brings characters and settings to life will have you hooked on his writing, which is why I have it included in great places to start with Stephen King. So there you have it. Those are my recommendations. Those are 5, well, technically 6 if you count different seasons, book recommendations that I think would be great places for people who want to start out with Stephen King. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment down below. Let me know if you've read Stephen King, what was your first Stephen King book, and if you haven't, what book do you want to start his work out with? Subscribe to my channel for all of the bookish, horror, and cozy gaming content. Stay safe, stay spooky, and I will see y'all in the next video. Bye!